Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. What do we have on tap for this week? What is it? Oh, it's Season 4, Episode 29. One, Donald Trump, the Secret Service, and your faith. Where is it truly placed? Can one have all of these conspiracy theories batting around in their head and not be faithful to the very institutions that they will often claim, counterintuitively, mind you, are so inept? And that's pretty much it. Fighting off a summer cold. So it's going to be a real short episode. Thank you all for your attention and your support. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends far and wide, send to enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1. Donald Trump, the Secret Service, and faith.
When I wrote out the script for this piece, I didn't think it was going to be about faith. And yet, as it evolved over the course of this last week, it turns out that it is about faith. And we all have faith in something. And generally, if you look at the political landscape in this country, you know what? No. If you look at the political landscape on planet Earth, we have faith in our politicians. We have faith in the bureaucracies of the governments that have been built, and we have faith in their almighty power to do what? To keep us safe, to protect us. How do I know that that's where we've placed our faith? Not in a higher power, not in a God, not in our country or our fellow countrymen. We've placed our faith in a government, in a bureaucracy. How do I know as much? Because even when it fails, it doesn't fail, dear listener. Even when there's a failure, the failure was on purpose. You see, it was a conspiracy. Yes, it either works, and it works to perfection, or it was intentionally, yes, intentionally subverted. Our faith, therefore, is unwavering and unbroken. It either works or someone intentionally made it not work. It isn't, and it possibly couldn't be, that it never worked in the first place, and the whole thing is a veneer. If I gave you a fun little exercise to go to your Google machine and type into your Google machine, Secret Service Scandals 2014. Secret Service Scandals 2014. And then I asked you, do the same thing for the year 2015, and do the same thing for the year 2016. Your Google machine wouldn't be bored. Your Google machine would come back with plenty of hits, timely hits. Not all of them, of course, contemporaneous to those years, but enough where you'd say, wow, there was some shit going down with the Secret Service in the year of our Lord 2014 or 2016. Whether it's your faith in the prison system, such that no one could ever kill themselves in prison, absent the prison guards knowing it, or such that if someone died in prison, well, the prison guards, they might have been in on it. I mean, it couldn't be that our prison systems in this country are managed as poorly, if not more poorly, than the prisons that Stalin had set up to purge the Russian steppe of Jews and Ukrainians in the 1930s and the 1950s. It couldn't be that, because our government works. Our bureaucracy works. And if it doesn't work, then someone is intentionally screwing it up. We have one of the most effective police forces that's ever existed in the course of human history. That some dildo goes into a school and shoots it up, and the police response is literally sitting outside of the room but doesn't engage for 45 minutes, it's got to be some kind of conspiracy, because it works. It's effective. We have faith. If it doesn't work, then it was intentional. Someone intentionally did something to screw it up. It couldn't possibly be true that a guy goes to the rally of a presidential hopeful with a rangefinder and is identified by the police, who lose him and then say, oh, well, let's just stop there for a moment, because I want to dwell on this point. If that were the case, the Secret Service and local police identify a guy who's got a rangefinder at a presidential rally. This strange person is in their sights, and they lose track of him in the crowd, and then they say, well, crisis averted, and they go about their business. If that's the case, how often does something like that happen at every single presidential rally? Longtime listeners know that I use this analogy, which is used often by the government, particularly law enforcement. If an incident occurs and you are cited for it, the easiest one is speeding, and the police officer comes over and he says, hey, I'm giving you this ticket, and you say, hey, give me a break, can you let me go this one time? When a 20-year-old is brought up on drug smuggling charges and he's standing before the judge at sentencing and says, hey, I'm a young man, I've got my whole life ahead of me, can you cut me a break? What's the standard response? Yes, you got caught this one time, but it's likely that you've done this 5, 10, 50, 100 other times. And you're getting caught this once, and you're asking for the penalty to be levied as if you'd only done this once. But we know, even though we can't prove it, that you've done this many, many times. How often have you been speeding? Is this the first time you ever got caught smuggling drugs? How often is it that the Secret Service or law enforcement engaged in the protection of a presidential candidate in a public place, identifying suspicious characters who they lose in a crowd of people, and then saying, oh well, show must go on? Where is your faith, people? Where is your faith? This was inevitable. I have never been through any law enforcement training in my life. I've never been in the military. I've never had to address a situation from a tactical perspective. But I can look at the grounds where they held Donald Trump's presidential rally in Pennsylvania, and I can identify that there are only a few buildings that one could climb onto in order to try to take shots at anybody on that stage. By way of the aerials that we've seen on the news, one of those places was already occupied by a Secret Service sniper team. The only other building was right off the fairground that did not have anyone on top of it. Oh wait, that's right. It did have one guy on top of it. He happened to be a shooter who was able to pop off, 7 or 8 rounds at a presidential hopeful? By doing what? By walking over to the building and climbing up on the ladder that led to the roof. There were police officers that heard the cries of people saying, hey, there's a guy on the roof with a gun. And so in order to identify whether or not this was a credible threat, they needed to be able to look onto the roof. And yet it appears, at least from the evidence that has come out as of July 20th, 2024, when I'm editing this podcast, these officers didn't know where the ladder was on the exterior of the building to climb up and identify whether or not someone was actually on top of the building. Now understand, these are law enforcement officers who'd been charged with securing the area so that a presidential hopeful could get up and speak, and they didn't know how to get on the building from the exterior. So a police officer got on the shoulders of another police officer and hoisted himself up so that he could see whether or not there was a guy on the roof with a gun. And sure enough, there was. And the guy pointed the gun at him. And so they went tumbling down, these two officers did, hitting the ground and radioing, hey, there is a guy on the roof with a gun who might start taking shots at this presidential hopeful, a former president of the United States. Where is your faith, people? What do you have faith in? This was inevitable. Is it possible? Can it be real? Would the investigation into this entire incident show that the sniper team was notified that there was a potential shooter on the only other place in the area where a shooter could get up and take shots at the presidential hopeful giving a speech at that very moment, and they didn't have authority to pull the trigger? They didn't have the authority to take this guy out. Can that truly be a possibility in this case? With all of the things that we've heard over the course of the last 10 years about how police officers, governmental agents, whether in the FBI or the CIA or the Secret Service, how they engage the U.S. citizenry. Is it possible that they identified this guy on the roof with a gun and didn't have the green light to shoot at him before he popped off rounds at the presidential hopeful? And if that were true, would the Secret Service be so stupid as to volunteer that as an excuse on why they didn't engage this person prior to them getting the shots off? Where is your faith, dear listener? This was inevitable. What really came through me this week in preparing for this piece is this whole concept of faith. You see people who are so married to their belief system, and it is a very secular, material belief system. Is it not? Is that not apparent in what you see in people's reaction to this assassination attempt on Donald Trump? None of these institutions, I have been preaching this for the 4 years I've had this podcast, and for those of you who know me, and many of you do, because the listenership hasn't gotten so broad that I don't know most of you, you know I've been preaching about this for decades. None of our institutions is that good at doing what they are charged with doing, what they are entrusted with doing. They're just not that good. They're not that good at it. They have bad days at work, just like everybody else, but with the gravity of the things that they're managing and the types of people that gravitate to that type of work, namely because it's so political and it can often be very tribal, you're not getting the best and the brightest. We've always been told that those who gravitate to Washington, D.C. are some of the best and brightest, not just in this country, but on planet Earth. I don't have recency bias anymore, ladies and gentlemen. I don't feel it, dear listener. I don't know that it was ever the case. There, by the grace of God, goes each and every one of us. If your faith lies in government, if it lies in bureaucracy or a politician, you will be sorely disappointed, and you will be relegated to engaging in pathetic mental gymnastics so that you can somehow keep your faith in these institutions, in these governments, in these bureaucracies, in these politicians, and yet justify the sheer and utter fucking incompetence in that it's not sheer and utter fucking incompetence. It's that it was all on purpose. It was a conspiracy.
Act 2. Summer colds are the worst.
Not going to be a particularly long episode this week. I felt like I had to do the piece on Trump. I'd been prepping it. But over the course of the week, I received one of the worst guests that you can have in the summertime. The dreaded summer cold. I don't know that there is a hospitable place to have the summer cold. I know that one place that's not hospitable to have a summer cold is Arizona when it's 112 degrees outside. Although my pool wouldn't like it, I'd welcome a little haboobery to at least get some moisture in the air and cool this place down such that it doesn't feel like I'm having hot sand blown into my face by a hairdryer while I struggle mightily to breathe. On that note, I'm going to sign off on what is probably the shortest episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast that I've done. I am many things. Many of those things not worthy to brag about. But one thing that I am is disciplined. And I'm going to come out with an episode every week, come hell or high water. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.